You are listening to the Nosy Dragon. I'm your dungeon master / innkeeper, Justin. I am joined by my patron / player, Ben.
A good day to you.
In today's session, we talk all about engaging combat. This episode was made possible in part by the Unseen Servant Association, or USA. Welcome to the tavern, Ben.
Oh, man. I'm going to need a drink and fast.
Yeah, you look like shit, man. What happened?
Well, on the way here, I got into a little bit of a scruff. There happened to be a kobold who made a saucy remark about my mother, and one thing led to another. Yeah.
Sounds like you got engaged in some combat.
I was very engaged. Although...
Here, let me. I got this wand of prestidigitation from Folgre's Magical Mundanities.
Oh, I love them.
Let me just. Whoa, there you go.
Oh.
Fresh.
Thank
Man,
you.
Combat's been pretty common here in the tavern too. It's adventuring season, so getting a lot of adventures through, which means money income flow is a little bit better, but it also means that property damage is up too. Tavern brawls are far more common.
There are far fewer stools here than there normally are.
Yeah, they're all at the mechanic
Oh man,
getting repaired.
that sounds like you had some pretty engaging combat yourself.
Yeah. I say mechanic because actually most of my chairs are constructs.
What? Oh,
All right. Okay. So, combat. So combat the reason why we wanted to just talk about combat is combat can be kind of boring sometimes, and it makes sense when you have a group of 4, which is pretty common, but all the way up to 6 players. So you have 6 players. Combat can take as much as 30 minutes per round, and when you're sitting there waiting for your turn, and the turns are not interesting, like someone's turn is like, okay, I rolled a hit. Okay, that's a 19. Does that hit? And it's like, yeah, that hits. And it's like, okay, roll damage. And it's like, all right, 7 plus 3. That's it's 10 piercing damage. And it's like, okay. All right. Then I'm going to use my bonus action to cast Firebolt. And it's like, oh no, sorry, you can't cast Firebolt. That's a full action. And it's like, oh right, Firebolt is a. I thought it's just because you can use cantrips on a bonus action. It's like, yeah, but it has to be a bonus action cantrip. Because you use your full action to attack, and it's like, okay, yeah, and in that case, I'll move 5 feet back. It's like, okay, that provokes an attack of opportunities. Okay, yeah, never mind. I'll just stay where I'm at. And it's like that's not interesting. That's not fun.
So dry.
It's not exciting. It's just kind of like, and if you have to sit through 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 30 minutes of that, it's exhausting. And so, of course, you're going to check out, you're going to get on your phone or talk to the person next to you. And then you're not engaged. Literally, when it's your round, it's your turn. You don't know what's been really happening on the battlefield. You're not paying attention. You're like, oh, who should I attack? Who's at the highest health right now? Like,
Yeah,
it's just no fun for anybody.
definitely. I think most players are guilty of that. And, part of it is to blame. Certain players are more checked out than others. But it's really easy to if you don't have, engaging combat. If you don't have things happening.
Yeah. So let's talk about little ways, and some big ways, to make combat more exciting, more interesting, and just more fun, so that it can be an exciting 30 minutes. And combat really should be some of the highlights, the most fun parts of a campaign. Is most of your character sheet is, dedicated to combat. When you level up, you get more hit points. You don't get more charisma points.
You can.
Roleplay is definitely a good part about D&D, and certainly my favorite part about D&D. But the roleplay doesn't have to stop once the dice break out for combat.
Yeah, definitely. I think that a lot of fun roleplay can happen even just between you and the enemies. Like having a little taunting in between, between taking your strike and dodging someone else's.
Yeah.
part of the fun is you know, even taking a chance to turn things towards your favor, rolling an intimidation check and like shouting out against them, pounding your chest, or brandishing your weapon in the air before a strike, adding
Yeah.
those kinds of flourishes that make things more alive and colorful than just, um, yeah, I hit him.
Yeah.
Do I hit him?
Does a 28 hit?
Ugh.
What am I saying? Of course it hits. All right. Let me. It's like, okay. Yeah. So one of the things that I like to do is really vivid, very clear, imaginative, descriptive descriptions of actions in combat. Right. So okay, I'm run up to the enemy. Let's say it's a warforged bandit. And I pull out my my short sword and I give it a quick swing. Swing.
Mm.
All right, so I'm gonna roll to hit first, and then I'm gonna say, does that hit? And when the DM says yes, it hits, then I might describe the attack immediately, or I might wait to see how much damage I do to then describe the attack.
Mm.
Right, but even in the approaching moment, I'm like, okay, so I run up to him and I kind of duck under the last attack he made because he missed on the last turn. He tried to attack me, so I'm blending that in. I duck under
Yeah.
his sword strike, and I brandish my sword and strike it across his chest in one movement. And then it's like, okay, cool. So let's say I roll to hit, then I miss, and it's like, okay, well, my sword glances across the armor on the natural armor, on the warforge, creating little sparks.
Yeah.
Or the warforge, p- with mechanical precision rotates his wrist, and his sword blocks my blade before it can make contact with his chest plate or something. Often a dungeon master will jump in and add in a little spice, but it's totally in your best interest as well as a player to throw in spice because it's fun to add to the imaginative things that are going on in the battlefield. And then if I hit, I can describe what it looks like as I pop out a chunk of wood, or perhaps brutally damage one of the iron plates on his body, or
Yeah.
or even knock a plate off or something. And it's not
Yeah.
going to decrease the AC of the creature or anything like that.
Yeah. I would say like it's even just in your description of that, I can hear so much more like action, and like I can paint the picture so much more clearly in my head. It feels like things are happening rather than just like everything's paused while you roll a dice and see like what number's going on. And cuz I think that happens a lot with turn-based combat in D&D is like you take your turn and everything kind of freezes. But if you're constantly like explaining what it is that you're doing while it's happening, it keeps things moving a lot more fluidly, and
Yeah.
like it feels like it's actually happening in the moment. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, one of my favorite things to do. I was playing a you're gonna hear about this character a lot, but I was playing a Goliath paladin, who plot
Yes.
twist was actually a warlock, who thought he was a paladin. And how I would play that character is he would often point his sword at something, and then I would shoot Eldritch Blast through the sword. So
Mm.
the Eldritch Blast would emanate from the tip of the sword. Or later he realized that his power originated from this gem in his forehead. So he would, like put his hand to his forehead, or he would, kind of get into like a squatted stance with his fists at his side, not on his hips, but like, Dragon Ball
Yeah.
Z charging up kind of thing, and then like lean forward and pull his arms back and pull in his shoulder blades and shoot an Elder Blast from the gem in his foreheads, which that's really taking just flavor liberties there, because I think Eldritch Blast has verbal and semantic components. So obviously I can't just go as my verbal
Yeah.
component.
You can't vision like
Um,
beam it out, but
yeah, but there's so many ways that you can make a spell casting interesting for your character. I think if you look at Doctor Strange in the
mm.
Marvel movies, he puts up his hand and these runes show up, and he's moving his hands around and stuff before he pushes out an effect of some kind. And I think that's also kind of what I believe Wizards of the Coast was hoping for in D&D. So they were hoping that your spell descriptions would be like that because it is very, very distinct and very clear when a spellcaster is casting a spell. That's the
Yeah.
whole point of the sorcerer's sorcery point ability, subtle spell, is that it's always very obvious when someone's casting a spell. So when you cast Charm Person, you're like, drawing arcane runes in the air and going charm person or whatever in another
Yeah.
language and pushing the runes towards the person as they wrap around them and then sink in if it succeeds or shatters if it fails.
Yeah.
And they may not be familiar with what spell you just cast, but they will know, oh, you just tried to cast a spell on me.
Hmm.
Right. So I think that really diving into your descriptions of your attacks and your spells, your healing thing, if you're like, oh, I disengage, you can be like, I'm weaving side to side and
Yeah.
or I do a backflip or whatever you want to make it spice it up. So it's not just okay, I'm going to disengage and then I'll move, 25, let's see, 5, 10, 15, 20, 20 feet over this way. It's like, yeah. Or,
Okay.
I do the splits and then I do a cart roll or something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know this. I played a monk recently, an Eric Cochran monk, and a lot of my moves, because I could fly, I would tie in the fact that I could like dive high up into the air and like come down with a drop kick or like mix my my martial arts. I think martial arts are always pretty fun to describe, but one instance in particular, we were fighting an enemy that had resistance to most attacks except magical attacks. And because I was a pretty high level monk, my fists were considered magical. So instead
Mm,
of just attacking normally, I described it as I noticed that my blows, as far as I would strike, they weren't really reaching him. So I converted the key into my body through my fist, and every time it landed, that key would force itself out and into my opponent's body,
yeah.
which just felt so much more like vivid and like a much more clear explanation of how it works.
Mm.
I was very engaged.
Yeah, yeah. Something I like to do is describe as a dungeon master. I'm often the dungeon master, and I will describe. I remember some low level characters, and one of the players used the cantrip Acid Splash on an orc, and rather than just like it burns him and we move on, I was like, you splash the acid, sprays out of your fingertips, and it lands all over his chest. And I described the orcs earlier as having these big tattoos on their chest,
Yeah.
and like the tattoo begins to deform and holes beginning to grow in it as the orc is frantically trying to wipe the acid off, and then it's burning his hands, and he does a stop, drop, and roll, and then stands up and looks down at his chest and is furious that you've destroyed his tattoo.
Ah, man.
Right. Even though the player didn't say I'm trying to hit his tattoo, that's just one way that I can make the combat more engaging. And the
Mm.
players were having such a good time and felt like such badasses when really all we were doing is just standard, attacks every round, and then okay, your next turn. And
Absolutely.
um,
Mm.
yeah, I always try to have as much fun and think about how I can integrate the personality of the character that I'm playing as well. Like right
Mm.
now, I'm playing an artificer, and he's rules as written. This doesn't really work, but technically, he's a tiny person. He's size category tiny. He's like 6 inches tall, and he pilots his armor, his arcane armor, from within the helmet. And so I was like, okay, the armor is a medium class creature, and I'm standing in this steam train, and I hear a gunshot, and I poke my head out the window. But rather than looking backwards where it came from, I'm looking forwards, down the track and in front of the train,
Yeah.
and then I turned my head backwards rather than turning around backwards to take a look. And then I see like, oh, there's bandits attacking the train, and then I like rotate the rest of my body around, poke my arm out, and aim. And rather than just aim, I have a familiar with because I grabbed Magic Initiate
Mm.
and got the Find Familiar spell from the Wizard spell table. And rather than my my familiar being like a bird or something, I described it as a construct, like a tiny little construct. And I was like, yeah, the construct, flies out from the back of my head where it's normally, like attached to me and into my wrist, and I aim, and it's like helping me aim as like an aimbot. Mechanically, it wasn't doing that. It wasn't helping me at all. It couldn't take the help action to help me aim because it needs to be like next to the target I want to hit if
Right,
it wants
yeah.
to help me. Um, and yeah, I just rolled to shoot and stuff, and I was like, yeah, the bot says target acquired, and like, I shoot and I described my lightning lancer, lightning launcher and lancer, I don't know, lightning launcher as like shooting a shotgun shell size battery with like metal prongs at the end of it that land in the target and then electrocute it a moment later,
Yeah.
and I described the sound that it makes when it shot and all of that stuff. When I could have just go, okay, well, let's see, that guy's 300 feet away. I have sharpshooter, so I can make that distance. Okay, roll a hit. Does a 19 hit, and it's like,
Oh,
yeah, it hits. So it's like I'm still rolling in between all of that nonsense. But it just makes it so much more exciting, and it really puts you into the combat.
to give some context to this, this was his first action as his character. Like, this is how we are introduced to Just Tinker, like, robotic character, and it was perfect. Like, all the flavor that you added and all the different ways that you made to strike, like, unique, it totally set up the kind of, like, the image of your character, all the different, like, everything that he's about in combat. And to me, that just proves how much combat can be roleplay too.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, even if you want to think of like the flavor of how your character would do anything, it's helpful to sit down and to kind of think out some scenarios and what would that look like. I literally, for this artificer, because I wanted all of his magical abilities to be mechanical in nature and not like in my head canon, he's not using magic. Like he knows how magic works, and he could cast spells if he was completely, stripped of all of his tools and gadgets. He does know magic. He just refuses. He just prefers to use mechanical options, right? And he still uses spell slots. Like I'm not changing anything as far as the game works. Rules is written. I'm not doing anything differently, but I'm just flavoring it in a way. And so I literally spent time. I looked at all the spells on my spell list and
Yeah.
some that I might grab if I change spells on a short rest or a long rest. And then I was like, okay, how would I do this spell as my character? What would that look like? And I spent time writing down what all of my things could look like, and in all the different scenarios, how I could tweak them or flavor them so that I'm ready when the time comes to just jump in and have a vivid description of what my spell looks like and how I cast it.
Absolutely. And it makes all the difference. And I think that that can happen not only just with spellcasters, but with regular fighters too. Like taking like a weapon attack and flavoring it to be like if you're attacking someone with your sword, instead of it just being like I slash across his chest, maybe you like plunge it into the ground and pull back and have the metal fling you towards them and like elbow them in the chest. I know it's not exactly what you're going for, but it's still, you can still consider it a sword attack depending on how
Yeah,
unique
yeah.
your
I feel like
DM.
it doesn't matter if you roll a hit. If your dungeon master is weird, then I'm sorry. There's nothing you can do. They're going to be like, no, no, you can't describe it as any. You were doing slashing damage with your sword, so that's what I want. I want you to describe it as. That would suck. But I think for the most part, most DMs will be happy to hear you really spicing it up and jumping in and taking the reins and describing it. I know I would.
Yeah.
If you're like, okay, so let's say we're in a bar fight and I roll a hit with my short sword. Well, yeah, I'm doing slashing damage, and yes, it's with my short sword, but I would totally be like, okay, I grab the bottle of wine off the table from next to me, and I smash it over the guy's forehead, right? And it's like, yeah, that's well, I could see how a dungeon master would be like, no, if you want to do that, you need to do an improvised weapon attack and blah
Yeah.
blah blah, and it's like, no, I'm just trying to flavor. I'm just trying to make it more exciting. Like I'm just, so I think there are a lot of liberties, and I think your dungeon master is kind of where it ends. Like if he's like, no, I don't want you to do that because, blah, blah, blah. Or I don't want you to think in the future that means that you can use a wine bottle to do slashing damage
Yeah.
with your full proficiency bonus plus the hit and all that. So I understand, but also like I think a lot of liberty is there for most players at most tables.
Yeah.
So find exciting ways to incorporate that. Also, misses.
Mm, I'm so glad that we're touching on this because a lot of times a miss can feel kind of heartbreaking or a little
Mm.
like just like because
Or boring because it's
yeah,
like, oh, I miss. Okay, that's the end of my turn, I guess. Whatever.
exactly. But there are so many ways that you can make misses more exciting in just by using a little bit of description. Like even by describing the other person a little bit earlier, you were talking about this Warforged, like having them block your sword attack with like
Yeah.
expert precision, or having them like I love the idea of attacking more nimble enemies and flavoring it as instead of like hitting their armor, you like they duck under your blade or they do like a
Yeah.
backflip in place and or like wiggle their body to the side in a way that you didn't think made sense. You thought you were going to
Mm.
land. But like having those things not only paints a great picture of the enemy, but it also makes misses seem a lot more fun than just, oh, I missed.
Yeah. Yeah, I've also played hit points in sometimes as a DM is not literally hit points, but like kind of like an idea of
Hmm.
like, how many times, how long will combat take with this particular individual until they are injured or down. And so one time in a campaign, you guys were fighting this kung fu master who was
Right.
very old, and I decided to describe most of the hits as misses, as him dodging, but him getting more and more clumsy as the hits continued, right? So he was like,
Uh,
you cut the hem of his cloak now. Like it's like you're getting closer to actually hitting him, like he's getting exhausted, and you're getting closer and closer to actually striking his physical body. So it was clear that they were doing damage. It wasn't that they weren't doing damage. It's just that the damage was being represented differently than, oh, you have an arrow through your shoulder.
right.
Um,
Yeah.
because it's like, well, how many can one really take an arrow through the shoulder and then sit around a campfire or sit in a tavern for an hour and then that wound is just fine. And
Yeah.
then also overnight, the wound is just gone after 8 hours of sleeping. You're back to, you're good. You're ready to you break into a new day. So I've described often misses, hits as misses, or even misses as hits, but the hit didn't do anything, right?
Yeah.
So you miss, and instead of your arrow just swishes past him, I've described it for epic bosses or whatever as the boss reaching up and snatching the arrow out of the air and breaking it,
Yeah.
or deflecting it with a block, or pulling up their cloak and nabbing the arrow that way, or hitting it with their shield, or holding up a hand and a magical barrier reflecting the arrow, or something like that. Whatever makes sense for that character. Maybe he commands one of his undead minions to step in front and take the arrow,
Oh,
and
nice.
you didn't do any damage to the whatever. It doesn't change the mechanical effects of what happened in combat. I'm just describing it in a way that's way more interesting, way more evocative, way more exciting, that really pulls you into the moment. So
Yeah.
you can take your miss and describe it just as much as you would for your hit, and you can have a hit described as a miss for combat coolness, right? Let's say you're doing a gunfight, right? Let's say you have guns in your
Yeah.
campaign. You could describe a shot as a miss. Like it goes, through his hat, or it, hits this, bounces off the side of his gun or something, right? It's kind of like his luck is running out
Yeah.
before he dies, because it can be really kind of immersion breaking if like this human man in a gunslinger setting is getting shot 5 or 6 times in the chest and is just kind of just fine. Like, and he's like,
Yeah.
all right, I quit, and he drops his gun, he surrenders, and then we go on to have like a campfire talk where no one attends to his wounds, and he's got like multiple bullets inside of
Yeah.
him, and he's just fine. Like, what the heck? Like, or arrows, or crossbow bolts, or darts, or shurikens, or whatever. It's like, what? So you can describe them not always as literally hitting the target, or you can, if you like, say you have a barbarian and then the target, the shuriken hits him, but it goes so shallow into his skin because he's so tough
Yeah.
that you feel like you didn't do any damage, where you might have actually done damage, or I'm counting that as a miss.
Yeah, I feel so intimidated sometimes when you do an attack, like especially like a ranged attack or even like a melee attack, and you flavor it as you hit the enemy, but it just does nothing. Like
Yeah.
there's nothing more like shaking than having an attack that you have miss but described as a hit, because then you're like, wow, this guy's tough. He can
Yeah.
take it.
Yeah.
Mm.
I've done that a lot to describe really scary minions. I was showing a bodyguard of a BBG, and the bodyguard walked up to one of the lackeys and pulled the self-destruct pin on the guy's vest, and he blew up in the bodyguard's hands, and the bodyguard had, like, that cartoon explosion marks all over them, like the ash,
Yeah, the
like
char.
the burn marks on the face and stuff, but was just like, okay, and walked away. They did take the full like 25 fire damage, but I didn't describe it as they were injured. I described it as they just were like, shrug. And it really set the tone for like, whoa, that guy has a lot of HP, or they're really tough, or like, oh my, what, maybe they have fire resistance or something, whatever.
Yeah.
Describing that. I also like to describe resistances and damage immunities in
Yeah.
that way as well, so that you could, if you're listening, you can kind of like, wait, maybe are they?
Mm-hmm.
Do they resistant to fire damage? Like, is it not bothering them? Someone cast heat metal on one of my BBG's metal mask, and the BBG was immune to fire damage, and so I just had him he didn't do anything.
Oh, I knew it. I knew that was the case. I and it was because you described it in that way, in a way that was like he just sort of turned his head as if like, huh, that's interesting, with like no face
Yeah.
melting reaction whatsoever. And like,
Yeah.
and it makes it so much more interesting than just being like, all right, next turn. Mm.
Yeah. Or even in that sense, like, the creature's supposed to take its action to try to drop or remove the item or take damage. And I was like, well, he's just gonna choose to take the damage every round because he doesn't take any damage.
Mm.
Because he's immune to fire damage. So it's like, nah, he's not gonna take it off. Like, he doesn't care. It's not affecting his vision or anything. Like, it's
No,
just
he's
chilling.
just fine, just
Yeah.
fine. Hmm.
So yeah, that's all like describing combat. I think there are other little features. I guess one of the other things we can talk about is kind of like um, combining your attacks to make one. So let's say you have three attacks. You have your multi attack, which gives you two attacks, and then you have something that you can do with a bonus action. Like,
Yeah.
you have like a dancing sword that you can use to direct to attack on your bonus action, or you have homunculus or a familiar, or summons some sort of servant or whatever, some sort of magical thing that you're controlling that you use your bonus action to control, or something like that.
Yeah.
You can let's say you hit with all three attacks. You could, if you wanted to, also describe that as one singular attack where you like drive your dagger deep into the chest of the enemy and make eye contact with it and say something, or stab your sword into the whatever, or shoot an arrow that and describe it more epically. So lumping damage from multiple attacks together is one descriptive event to make it more powerful and to put more intent. If you have like real backstory against this particular villain, or your character is just really angry or something like that.
Yeah. I also would say that the opposite can also be worked very well to effect. Like if you have, the sort of anime swordsman trope, if you
Yeah.
like, you unsheath your weapon and do like 1,000 cuts all at once because you land like a critical hit or something,
Yeah.
then that's also really fun flavor. And then the moment that you sheath it, all the cuts suddenly appear and like blood splurts out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So just taking a lot of creative liberties and realizing like that the damage system, if you want to play it as like I slash and then it does that much damage, that's totally fine. And you can be
Yeah.
descriptive with normal attacks. But you can also take liberties if your dungeon master is cool with it, which I hope they are. They should be. If they're not, make them listen to this episode. Um,
Mentioning multiple sort of helpers or like assistance to attacks. It kind of reminds me of something. Would you like to share about our sponsor, perhaps?
Yeah, actually. So today's sponsor is the Unseen Servant Association, or USA. If you have a lot of menial tasks that you could do yourself, but just don't feel like doing, or you don't want to pay someone else to do it because it feels too expensive, well, then USA is here for you. USA's Unseen Servants can do almost any task that doesn't require spellcasting. No training or explaining necessary. Got dishes you need done? Easy. Got scrolls you need organized by alphabetical order? Done. Need someone to babysit? Okay, maybe not. But pet sitting is no problem. Get a bracelet of Unseen Servant of 10 charges per day from USA and save yourself time. USA, for the problems that you don't have time for.
Wow, man, I gotta tell you, having someone else brush your teeth is really nice.
I personally use the USA Unseen Servants for all of the jobs in the tavern. So they do all the dishes. They are all my cooks. They clean the place. They do all the sweeping, and I even have them serve drinks sometimes. And it's great. I've saved so much money on labor costs. I used to employ like 10 peasants, and now I employ nobody but myself. It's fantastic.
I was wondering, like, I thought that it'd be a little tough to run a whole tavern by yourself. I mean, you're, no ordinary guy, but still.
Yeah, I mean, the Uncertain Servant bracelet, it doesn't require attunement. So I actually have like 12 of them, and I just keep using them.
No, oh my God, that makes so
Yeah.
much sense.
It was a lot of investment up front, but I've saved so much money on costs. And also these guys, they never show up late. They never complain. They literally can't speak.
Wow. Yeah, they're here when you're here. I guess maybe dealing with customer complaints might not be the best situation, but you're here for that.
Also, they'll do anything you tell them to do as long as they're physically capable of doing it. They don't have so much strength or whatever, and their intelligence is a little low. But if they're capable of doing, if you can describe what you want them to do well enough, they can do anything. If you know what I'm saying, wink, wink. There's some things they can serve you in that you want to be unseen.
All right, all right. Let's move on, shall we? um, so
Good
yeah,
foot massage. That's what I'm talking about. I mean that kind of stuff.
right, right. I was gonna say that your outhouses are remarkably clean, and that makes a lot of
Yeah,
sense.
exactly. Yeah, I don't want to do that.
Me neither.
Describe it really cleanly. They clean it really well.
Ah.
Yeah. So another thing is bouncing off teammates, right? So let's say your teammate is doing something you can describe as doing it together. Like maybe if you're a small creature and you have, someone who's not large category because stupid rules, but you have a Goliath that should be a large category, but isn't. You can describe them as throwing you to use your movement. Which again, it doesn't change anything mechanically. Mechanically, you're still walking from this place to that place. Right. So, I mean, unless you want to be thrown, there's rules for that. Right. But you can just spice up regular combat, jumping off, players.
Yeah, I remember I was running a campaign for a few friends of mine, and one of them was a minotaur, and the other one was a halfling, and the halfling described themselves as like climbing up onto the back of the minotaur to use them as like a vantage point to shoot enemies with their crossbow. And of course, it doesn't change anything mechanically, but it definitely tied to the two of them's relationship.
Yeah.
And it made it a lot more funny and like creative.
Yeah, I think that's definitely really smart. It's smart, fun, smart role play.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. So as far as like making things engaging, we've talked a lot about ways that you can take regular combat and like by adding description and fleshing things out and how things happen, like mechanically nothing has changed, but there are ways that you can like take optional rules and have them enhance gameplay as well.
Yeah, there's a rule that we stole from 4th edition called Bloodied. And when a creature is at half its total hit points, right? So if you have a creature with 102 hit points At 51 hit points, it's bloodied. And bloodied means that it's at half health. So that's something you can tell your players, oh, this creature is bloodied. Now, bloodied was useful for things in 4th edition. There were like spells that had extra effects if a creature was bloodied, or attacks or abilities that you could only do when a creature is bloodied, or
Yeah.
bonuses that you had when you were bloodied and stuff like that. So we're not using it for any of those features. We're just using it as a descriptive tool to let players know, hey, the boss is bloodied. So you're halfway through, guys, don't give up. Or guys, you're only halfway through, you should give up.
Right. If you've been going on for about like 10 rounds of combat
Yeah,
already. And
exactly. Without giving them strict, without telling them exactly how much HP the monster has, you can still kind of give them a really clear idea of how combat is going.
yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I wanted to introduce an idea, and we talked about this before and fleshed it out a little bit, but I was thinking of the idea of critical. So critical would basically be something is about to die, and you use critical to tell them. So like bloodied, oh, the creature is bloodied, you can say, oh, the creature is critical. So critical would mean, and I specifically wrote it out so that you have like a reference that you can pull this up to if you want to use it in your own game to be as clear as possible.
Yes.
And it's still not super clear because of difficulties of making this work in on any creature,
Yeah.
without having to do a ton of math. So blood critical is stated as when a creature or object has less than half of its total hit points remaining, and one standard attack from the party of damage would reduce it to 0 hit points. The creature or object is considered critical.
So if I were fighting like a manticore or something, and the whole party had been ragging on it for a while, and I did a perception check. Hey, like, what's this creature at right now? If any of us could, like, with whatever standard attack we usually do, could kill it, that's critical.
Exactly right. So basically, it's something I would announce as a dungeon master, or I guess something you could ask as a player, because there's a lot on your dungeon master's plate sometimes.
Yeah.
And you go hey guys, yeah, now he's critical, right? So let's say the warlock has Eldritch Blast, and their Eldritch Blast, is what 1d8 plus their charisma modifier if they're a certain type of warlock, and then they do that. One of those attacks, so 1d8 plus 5 or whatever, is on average going to be enough to kill this creature. Or the barbarians, great axe plus 5 of strength. Typically, most players optimize their characters to work well. Would be enough to kill this thing with one attack. So that's like 11 damage on average, right?
Yeah.
So well, no, yeah. So 11.5. So basically, it's like, would that much damage roughly kill the creature? Now, the reason why it's not a specific number is because if you have a goblin with 4 HP, yes, one attack would kill that creature outright. For most any landed hits from your party of level 10 player characters, right?
Yeah.
So that creature is not considered critical because that would be weird. It's like, well, is this a critical creature? It's like, that's not what I mean when I say critical. I mean like they're in critical condition, they're about to die,
Yeah.
and just one more average hit will take them down. So that's why it specifically says when a creature has less than half of its total hit points remaining, and one standard attack from the party of damage would reduce it to 0 hit points. So it's not like something can't be considered critical just because you on average could do enough damage with one hit to kill it.
Yeah. They have to be actually injured.
Yeah, and I definitely think there is some wiggle room here. Like me, if I'm a dungeon master and I know that on average on one turn, Ben does 25 damage, then I would go ahead and consider that critical. However, that's with him using multi attack and stuff. So technically, it's not critical. It wouldn't be critical. But I think the purpose of critical is really beneficial if your players are kind of losing hope because it looks like they're not going to make it through this battle and they're thinking of running away. It's like, hey, well, let me let you guys know. You guys know just by obvious observation that, Vecna is critical right now and one more, hit will get him. And then it's like, okay, well, can we survive another round of combat? Okay, let's go for it.
Yeah. I definitely say, like, from a player's perspective, this is also really useful depending on what enemy you're fighting, because either you could prepare to do like your flashy finishing move and having
Yeah.
like some great cinematic finish to fighting a big enemy, or if it's someone that you don't necessarily want to kill, then you could be like, all right, I'm going to do
Okay.
non-lethal
Exactly.
damage this time,
Yeah.
or I'm going
Non-lethal
to try
damage.
intimidate him and see like, you're on your last legs, like give
Yeah.
up now or you're done or we'll kill
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really smart. Also, it's kind of like if you have multiple targets, there's many things that you're trying to attack, but they're all decently dangerous. It's not like they're weak, targets.
Yeah.
One of them is decently low in health, and you're like, okay, should I use this spell? Should I cast lightning bolt on this creature and do 86 lightning damage? It's like, and it's like, oh well, that guy's critical, and it's like, oh shoot, yeah, all right, I'll just punch him. All right, next target. It's like
Yeah.
that takes out a lot of stress because it can be really disappointing as a player when you've saved a resource and then you waste it on something. It's something as a DM I've stopped other players from doing sometimes. As like, all right, I'm gonna use my key point, do flurry of blows, and I'm like, whoa, 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 just try. Let's just punch it once first. Let's see what happens. Before
Yeah,
you go ahead and
definitely.
use your key points and make 5 attacks on this kobold, like just hit it once. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
that's an optional rule that I'm certainly gonna employ going forward as a DM, and because it's just more fun. It's more fun to have a little bit more information to know, to strictly tell how much HP that could bring about a lot of metagaming,
Hmm.
but which isn't necessarily fun. You think it's fun, but it's often not fun. So it's best to have a general idea without knowing too much that it just ruins the game for you.
Yeah, definitely. Mm.
Okay, so the next thing is you don't have to take an action on your turn. So let's say you're playing a pacifist or you're playing someone who's aloof or depressed. Like let's say, they've been adventuring in the party, like one of the other players was his wife or something and they died. And now combat's happening and it's right after the death and you feel like, well, my character wouldn't do anything. Then you don't have to. You
Uh,
can just pass. Like, my character is
yeah.
just soaked in grief. They're mourning, they're pass until someone attacks them. Right. Or maybe you're a pacifist and you're like, yeah, I'm just not going to fight.
Mm.
Or you can take actions on your turn, like, oh, I'm going to take the dodge action and I'm just going to walk through the battlefield. Or I'm going to take the disengage action and I'm just going to walk away uh, from the combat. Like, I'm just not interested.
Yeah, I think a lot of players have a sort of anxiety around this because, you know, with party dynamics, it can be like, well, hey, we're all fighting this guy. Like, what the heck? Why aren't you
Yeah.
helping us out? But I think in the context of role play and having the game be fun and engaging, taking no actions on combat is not the end of the world. Like in a campaign that I'm running with Just in it, one of our other players is this very like emo, doesn't care about what's going on, like very reserved in his own world. And the first combat that we got into, when it came to his turn, he was like, yeah, I just sit here. I'm like, man, I hope that the guys my dad hired are taking care of everything well, and like everyone got a laugh out of it, and it was
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, it was very engaging. Even though he literally didn't engage in combat, he engaged in role play that was exciting and that felt like character building and felt like, oh, this is appropriate.
Yeah,
Oh, I believe in this pulls me into the suspension of disbelief rather than pulling me out of it.
exactly. And I think that having moments like that are completely fine in combat. Not everything has to be,
Yeah.
let's get this over with.
Yeah. Role play in combat is super, super fun.
Mm.
Like you had mentioned earlier, taunting, intimidating, or peacekeeping. And also check with your DM. Sometimes your DM will let you roll persuasion checks or intimidation checks within combat without having it take a full action or even a bonus action or even a reaction. Sometimes they'll let you do it as a free action. I often let my players communicate as a free action in combat.
Yeah,
And if they want to persuade a target, it depends on the scenario. It depends on how much they want to say. But often I just let them do as a free action. Like, okay, I want to try to intimidate the guy. And I'm like, go for it. And then it fails or succeeds. And then I let them take a full action after.
yeah.
So, yeah, check with your DMC. All right. So, cutting deeper into optional rules. And the Dungeon Masters guide, the DMG, there are optional combat rules that I feel like can really spice up combat, make it a little more exciting, a little more interesting.
Yeah.
That are rules that exist. That are ways to make combat a little more engaging. If you guys have a lot of combat at your table, these might be things that make it more exciting, breathe some new life into your combat.
I only recently discovered these. Like, I had no idea
Yeah.
that they existed. And man,
Hmm.
I wish that I read deeper into the DMG before
Yeah.
I did.
So
Ah,
there's a section in the DMG that says action options, and these are options or optional things that you can add in. Most people use one of them, and I'll cover that briefly. So one of the actions you can do is climb onto a bigger creature, and that's pretty self-explanatory. But there are rules for it in the DMG, so you can look into that and read the specific rules. There's a lot of rules, so I'm not going to read them.
okay.
Disarm. That's the one that all of us probably know about. It's
Yeah.
if you have a dungeon master screen provided by Wizards of the Coast, disarm is there and explained and how it works. So that's definitely one that I've used because I have that dungeon master screen that you can get from Wizards of the Coast, and it says disarm on it as some of the actions that you can do in combat. And so I just assumed that it was a part of the core rules, but it's actually an optional rule. I think disarm is great. You make an athletics thing, stuff kind of like a grapple, and you can knock the weapon out of a creature's hand, which is awesome. And
Yeah.
then they have to spend time, to go get it, go pick it up or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think
Definitely a
that's
great way with dealing with enemies that you don't necessarily want to kill.
yeah.
Or if your character's a pacifist, or if like they're a high value target that you need information from, being able to
Mhm.
take the weapon out of their hands is a pretty good bet.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's really really slick and cool. And
Yeah.
also, if your dungeon master is cool, they might let you do this with a ranged attack, right? Like, oh, I try to shoot my arrow and knock his sword out of his arm or something like
Ooh,
that.
I definitely.
Or as not a thing in just regular melee combat, you can disarm someone's shield to lower their AC.
Oh my god, I didn't even think about that. Oh wow. Yeah, that's a great use of an action.
That's a super good use of an action. Like, my gosh, this guy's so hard to hit. Dropping their AC by two, that's awesome and super helpful.
Absolutely, that's sick.
Yeah.
It could
Um,
change the tide of combat for sure. I was thinking, since I'm running a Western campaign right now, like the whole
yeah.
classic trope of shooting a gun out of someone's hand would
Yeah,
be pretty sick.
exactly. Of course. Yeah. Mark is a thing. I'm not going to read it, but it's a thing you can do. It has to do with opportunity attacks. Overrun, shove aside, and tumble are all ways that you can move through an enemy's space on a combat board. So typically in
Ooh.
D&D, there's no way to move through an enemy on the battle map. You have to go around them or kill them to go over them, but you can't just move through. So if someone's blocking a hallway, there's no way to get past them. I believe rules is written unless you do the push, which is shove. You can do shove, I think, or push. I can't remember what it's actually called, but you can do shove to knock someone over, and then I think technically you still can't move through their
Yeah, no,
space.
even if the creature's prone, you can't move through their space. They
Yeah,
like the whole like grab their leg, like throw something up at you. But
yeah.
yeah,
So these rules allow you to move through someone's space, and I think, wow, of course, yeah, that should be a thing. Like, yeah, of course, like, nice. And they're not
definitely.
overpowered or anything. They're just things that make sense that you should be able to do. So definitely look into that Dungeon Master's Guide. I don't know what page it's on, but it's under action options. In
I'm
Yeah,
pretty sure it's page 270. If
nice.
you've got a DMG with you.
So here's another one that some of you guys might have done intuitively, but you can ask for this as a player because these are optional. So your dungeon master, doesn't have to dedicate to do these things raw. Rules is written, but it is in the books, so you can ask for it. It's not even an extra book like Tasha's Hideous Cauldron or Tasha's Cauldron or Xanath's Guide to Everything, but it's an optional rule in the DMG. So hidden cover, it's basically if you would miss a target because of the cover that the AC that the cover is giving them, but it would have hit their normal AC had the cover not been boosting their AC,
Right.
right? Then you hit the cover instead. And that does damage to the cover and could, if they're behind a barrel or crate or, a piece of drywall or something that could damage enough that on the next round you might be able to hit them through the cover now because there's a hole in it or because it's destroyed completely, or you might be able to hit the cover again and destroy it on the next round or whatever. So it's just something happening when nothing would have happened prior, and I think that's exciting and interesting.
That's also very interesting when it comes to using people or other creatures as
Yeah,
cover, because having it suddenly be an issue where if you are hiding behind somebody, like ranged attack missing, meaning that person or individual is now in danger, could be pretty bad if it's one of your friends, or pretty great if you're using someone else's cover, like grappling
exactly.
them and
Yeah,
putting them
like
in front of
if
you.
you're playing a spellcaster, you can raw stand behind your other players in combat and use them as cover and shoot through them because they are allies, and you don't have to worry about using ranged attacks through an ally space. It's not a problem.
Yeah.
You just shoot right through their space. So you can stand right behind someone and use them as cover. Um, Now, cover is not something that everyone really has a great grasp on, so I think a lot of people would miss that and be like, "Oh well, my goblin will just shoot you anyway, even though you're standing behind him." Like it's something that I've done as a DM because I just kind of didn't think about it,
Yeah.
and it was just like, "I'm just trying to hit you, so I'm just gonna." He's not trying to hit him; he's trying to hit you. Like, anyway, so if you miss, right, because of the AC provided by the Goliath barbarian standing in front of you, right, the DM misses you, the hit could still hit if it would have hit your AC, but it would instead hits the creature that's in front of you.
Yeah,
So that's also really cool.
definitely. I'm absolutely wanting to add that because that can do some really fun like hostage situation type deals. Uh,
Yeah. So
very
here's a
fun.
cool one that was kind of it was a rule in 3.5 for sure. I don't know about fourth edition, but in 3.5 there was a feat called Cleave, and then there was another feat called Greater Cleave. So this is kind of like that,
Mm.
except it's something that is an optional rule that everyone would be able to do. And I'll read it outright. I'll read the whole thing. So it says if a player's characters regularly fight hordes of lower level monsters, consider using this optional rule to help speed up such fights. When a melee attack reduces an undamaged creature to 0 hit points, any excess damage from that attack might carry over to another creature nearby. The attacker targets another creature within reach, and if the original attack roll can hit it, applies any remaining damage to it. So you don't have to roll again. So if you rolled a 22 to hit the goblin, that 22 will carry through all the goblins, no problem. So you don't have to keep rolling. So it doesn't slow down combat. It actually speeds it up. Um,
Ah.
yep. The attacker, the attacker targets another creature within reach, and if the original hit, it applies any remaining damage to it. If the creature was undamaged and is likewise reduced to 0 hit points, repeat this process, carrying over the remaining damage until there are no valid targets or until the damage carried over fails to reduce an undamaged target to 0 hit points.
Man, I can see. I played 3.5, and that rule acted as a feat. And one of our a close friend of mine built a character around that feat, and
Yeah,
just had a
as did I.
blast swinging through as many people as they
Yeah.
could get close to. And that's such a fun thing if you're able to do that.
Yeah, it was a little bit better in 3.5. It wasn't remaining damage. I think you just got to roll a hit again if you killed something.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah.
But
Yeah, so
again,
it
it
was a
was a
little
feat
bit
back then.
better. Yeah, and I think regular cleave was just like one other target, and then greater cleave was like as many targets as you'd like. I built many a half orc barbarian around the cleave feat and would always go for it and grab that feat.
Mm.
And when I leveled up higher, I'd grab the improved greater cleave. So definitely cleave is a fun thing. I would also personally allow it to work with range attacks as long as the targets are behind each other.
Hmm.
So like if you've got a bunch of goblins in a line, the arrow can pierce through all of them
Yeah.
until it runs out of
A
damage or the
javelin
AC
shish
gets too
kebab.
high. Exactly. However, if the targets are side by side and I'm shooting straight on, that's not going to work.
No, no.
So, but I can see why they didn't add that because that would make it a little more complicated and a little harder to understand and line things or yeah. So whatever.
And D&D 5e is all about simplicity. So
So next we talk about injuries, and these are something again that I think are really cool. So injuries are damage normally leaves no lingering effects. This option includes the potential for long-term injuries. It's up to you to decide when to check for a lingering injury. A creature might sustain a lingering injury under the following circumstances. When it takes a critical hit, when it drops to 0 hit points but isn't killed outright, when it fails a death saving throw by 5 or more. So definitely stuff that I think could be really cool. I certainly, obviously, you can take an injury from something that your dungeon master just thinks is appropriate, like hit by a horse or a boat that's being craned from one dock to another lands on you.
yeah, falling for a
Oh,
trap, like a swinging
yeah,
glaive trap.
exactly. Yeah, some sort of really big amount of damage. So I think, you can kind of see what fits, what's more exciting, but you could use the specific examples they give as the only ways that happen if that's, feels a little bit safer because then there's some rules determined. And then there's a table that you roll on. And the table has options like lose an eye, lose an arm or a hand, lose a leg or a foot, limp, internal injury, broken ribs, horrible scar, festering wound, and minor scar. And all of those have ways that you heal them or get rid of the wound, and the effects that those wounds have on you. And I just think, like, man, what a way to make getting critically hit a little more exciting in a negative way. It kind of puts a little
Yeah.
bit more tension in combat that
I
wasn't there
was I
before.
was about to say this rule is not for the faint of heart. Like you're adding this to your campaign,
Yeah.
not for your new players, your level ones. This is for those who really want to have combat be like heart racing and scary. Like
Yeah. It's like, okay, so you took 4 arrows to the chest, and now you're just gonna just take a short rest and
sleep it
you're good.
off.
Or you're gonna, let's say you might bandage yourself up, but and you're feeling better, but the real wounds just close and heal completely over one long rest.
Yeah.
Just some sleep and you're good. Like,
Yeah.
you know, you jump out of a castle window and take, 84 damage out of your 96 hit points, and you just sleep it off. You're good.
Yeah. Oh, so funny.
You're fine.
Yeah.
Right. So, speaking of taking 84 damage out of 96 hit points, another optional rule is massive damage.
Mass.
This optional rule makes it easier for a creature to be felled by massive damage. Now, I would say that this is something that I would only use on monsters.
Huh.
And the reason why I would only do it on NPCs, monsters, and creatures and like that are for the party to attack and not for players is because combat isn't really supposed to be balanced. There isn't supposed to be balance in D&D. A balanced encounter means that your party will succeed 95% of the time, right? But feel like they might have had a chance to lose, right?
Mm.
Like that's what a real balance condition is. Even Gary Gygax himself has a quote where he said something like, "Your party should succeed most of the time, right? You shouldn't be dying every round." And he explained that like if a player dies consistently in combat, they will lose interest in playing D&D. Like
Yeah.
combat should be something that you most of the time succeed. So when it comes to challenge rating, it's not like, oh, this is a challenge rating 14, so that means 4 players with no magic items but all the typical abilities. At level 14, if they're all level 14, this will be an appropriately challenged event where it's a 50-50 outcome. One or the other side will die. No, that's not it. It's the party will succeed, and at a challenge rating 14, it should be easy. Like nobody should die. Most people should take damage, but no one should die,
Yeah.
right? If you have a challenge rating 20 creature against a bunch of 14s, it's not, oh, they're just going to lose. It's one of them might die,
Yeah.
right?
It's
And
like
that's why you can have a challenge rating 30 creature that a party of 4 can fight at level 20, and it's not like, oh, you're just all dead, guaranteed.
It's
It's not
like,
how it
wow,
works.
some of you may die in this. Yeah.
Yeah, most of you may die in this, but success is certainly possible, and
Some
so it
of
should
you may
always be.
die, but that is a sacrifice that I'm willing to make.
Yeah. So I feel like so for when it comes to massive damage, I don't necessarily think it would be fun as a player to get hit for a ton and then fail the Constitution saving throw and then drop to 0 hit points.
Yeah.
However, it would be very exciting as a player to, shoot something, do a crit, hit, crit with something, do 55 damage, and the NPC has to roll a DC 15 Constitution saving throw, and then one of the, five random effects happen, right? So the five random effects are the creature drops to 0 hit points, so that's obviously the most exciting. The
Yeah.
creature drops 0 hit points, but is stable, so right, they don't die outright. It's not like they're just flatline dead; they're just unconscious, right? So they're past their saving throws. 4 to 5 is the creature is stunned until the end of its next turn. So again, it's not just flat out dead. It's stunned, which is a great condition. Stun gives you advantage and
Oh
stuff.
yeah.
It's a lot of fun. The creature can't take reactions and has disadvantage on attack rolls and ability checks until the end of its next turn. So like almost gets like a layer of exhaustion.
Wow. For that turn, yeah.
And then the creature can't take reactions until the end of its next turn. So it's like the least of the
Yeah.
effect. It's like, oh, okay, well, all right, I can run away from it now without having to take the disengage. So that's cool. But or it can't cast shield, I guess. So I just think really exciting, and also it can make you feel more powerful as a group if you're a high level group and you're fighting, some thugs, and you do half its HP. It's cool if oh yeah, he just dies, like
Yeah.
come off and he just dies, like
That is, it's such a satisfying feeling. I can definitely see like implementing this and having some really memorable moments come out of it.
yeah.
Like,
Or the creature is stunned. Now the reason why this wouldn't be fun as a player is because being stunned, losing your reactions, getting disadvantage, dropping to 0 hit points. Like I have 80 hit points and I took 40 damage and then I failed my Constitution saving throw and now I'm just out of the fight.
I'm just dead.
Where I had 40 more hit points. Like that sucks. Like or just straight up you just die.
Yeah.
Like or not die. I mean
You
you
have
have
to
to
roll
roll
death
saving throws.
but still.
Yeah, it's like that's what the heck? Like that's so overpowered. So I definitely don't think that it would be fun because I think it would kind of mess with the balance. I think having your players have really awesome crits can be really exciting and make combat a little more engaging, right? So you can be like, oh, crits do 4 times damage,
Yeah.
but monsters still just do regular 2 times damage. Because again, it's not about creating balance; it's about making the game fun with the illusion of balance. So I think massive damage is something that to be considered and brought into a game, but maybe not brought in on both sides, just for the players.
Yeah. For sure.
In the sense that just for the players to have the enemies happen to,
Just
not
for the game to be fun for the people yeah.
okay. So this one it might be intuitive to a lot of us, and a lot of us may have done this automatically. We're not gonna go deep into it, but there's rules for morale. To explain how morale can work in combat. So again, look at your Dungeon Master's Guide. But basically, morale is like if a creature would be scared, they might run away, or they might surrender, or they might pass out, or there's a bunch of different things that a thing is done. One of the suggestions is it says like if the group's leader is reduced to 0 hit points or incapacitated, right, or taken prisoner or removed from battle, then like the rest of the group might concede or surrender or run away
Yeah.
or change up their tactics, right? Like they might take your side, they might join you or something like that. So it's just to make combat more engaging and more realistic and more fun. If you one shot the bandit leader, the other bandits shouldn't just be like, yeah, we got this. Like
Oh my god, that reminds me so much of a bit. It's just like because it happens so often in video games, like NPCs. It doesn't matter how many of them die; the rest of them will still try and kill you. And it's just like, dude, I obliterated there. That person is dust. What like what are you? Do you have no value for your life at all? Like,
Yeah. Have you heard of the term self-preservation?
exactly. Yeah.
Are you
So
not afraid of death?
having morale definitely makes NPCs feel a lot more real too. They're like, yeah, these are real people who value their lives and don't
Yeah.
want to get eviscerated.
Yeah, I especially do this for animals because something I learned about most predators, which a lot of people have misconceptions on predators, like a bear or tiger, or,
Hmm.
whatever, a jackal, hyena. They are not ruthless killers that enjoy killing, unless you're killer whale. Um, they are just trying to eat. And most animals won't take on a threat if they feel like they might get injured because they have an injury table, right? And if they get a wound, a little cut can end an animal's life,
Yeah.
right? So a tiger often won't attack you if you're making eye contact with it because it doesn't want to take the chance that you could attack it. And that's so effective that people in certain countries where, tigers are more common will wear cheap masks on the back of their head to make it look like they're looking in both directions at all
Man.
times. And the tigers just won't attack them because it's like, I don't want to take the chance. If there's even a chance that I could get injured in trying to get my lunch, I might die anyway. So,
Yeah.
like, I'd rather be hungry today and try again tomorrow. So, in severe circumstances where an animal might not be discouraged, is if they're starving to death and they're
Hmm.
like, if I don't eat today, I'm gonna die anyway. So, might as well have a full stomach and die of this festering wound on my arm than just die of starvation, right?
Yeah.
Or it has rabies, or in D&D, it's enchanted. You know?
Yeah. Someone has it's placed some hexing spell on the creature to force it to fight. But yeah,
Yeah.
even just like having that kind of idea of like maybe create like this group of bandits in their hideout has animals in cages that they've just been starving so that if they
Yeah.
have the chance they can sick them on.
Yeah, or bandits that are like, come out and be like, all right, give us all your money or we're gonna cut you up like a fish. And then you all pull out your swords and ready your spells. And then they're like, okay, never mind.
Yeah, we'll leave you
We was joking. We was because they thought you were gonna surrender and be, oh, please don't hurt us, and it's like, oh, you guys are ready to fight? Okay, maybe not.
Yeah, like
Maybe.
actually, you guys, you have a nice night now.
Yeah.
You fellas take
Just
care.
kidding. So I think an intimidation check could make a creature not want to fight. It suggests a surprise. So like, let's say the creatures are having a campfire, and you guys successfully sneak up on them and pull out your weapons. They might just be like, all right, yep, we concede. Please don't kill us,
Hmm.
right? Or they just might run or whatever, rather than being like, yeah, all right, cool. I don't care that you caught us with our pants down. Let's fight. Um,
You have to be a very
so
particular person for that kind of situation.
or half of their group, their numbers are gone, half of them are dead. It would make sense that they might run away. Or it's like, oh my God, like we're not winning.
Mhm.
We should concede. There in history, in real history of the battles, real battles, the Mongolian horseback riding warriors were famous for breaking morale. They would do these weird formations and stuff where they would make people scared, and most of their tactics were getting people to flee and then trying to shoot them while they were fleeing with their bow and arrows,
Mm.
rather than fighting them outright. So they were known as these fearsome warriors, but most of their tactics were designed to break morale and make people afraid. It was mostly fear tactics that got people to surrender
Mm.
or to run away. And so they were like, yeah, it's better to have dead people working for us. I mean, living people working for us than a bunch of corpses on a battlefield,
Yeah.
And so it was more about breaking morale. And so, yeah, or they would just go after who looks like they're in charge, and that would often break
Mhm.
morale again. So they would flank, from two different directions and just focus fire on one person. And then often the group would just surrender because it's like, oh, shoot, our general's dead. All right, maybe.
Yeah.
So
Ah.
I think bringing in morale is an often way. They suggest some saving throws and things like that you can do to give a creature morale. So there's plenty of rules there and lots of wiggle room and things that you can
Yeah.
do. But
You can feel free to add any number of these into your campaign. I definitely feel like a lot of these make sense, which makes them
yeah,
so appealing.
yeah,
Um, and so I definitely, as someone, maybe not for like newer players, but I
yeah,
definitely like it can definitely be a lot to remember. But for
yeah,
players who have done D&D for years and like some of them might have come from 3.5, but yeah, like those who want more rules and more ways to do things, totally add these in, because that's you can flavor combat a lot better.
Yeah, I've been playing D&D since literally I was like 7 years old. But realistically, I have closer to like 16 to 15 years of D&D experience. Like most of the standard rules I have a pretty good grasp on, so adding these additionals are not overwhelming at all, and it's just
Yeah,
kind of like I already know all the other stuff by heart. So adding this, these optional rules is just kind of like, oh, that's cool. Yeah, let's do that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But if you're new to D&D and this is your first time dungeon mastering or your first time being a player, it can be daunting and overwhelming just to remember the base rules. So I totally get if you don't want to do these things, but certainly remember all of the awesome things about increasing engaging role play with vivid, clear descriptions and describing your actions in combat, describing your failures, and bouncing off other players in combat is a way to engage everybody and to keep to keep away the monster of boredom and looking at your phone because of 30-minute combat rounds.
Yeah. And everyone can do this. And anyone and everyone can make their combat more exciting by like adding these fun descriptions and like making
Yeah.
fun choices. Yeah.
Thank you guys so much for listening and get out of my tavern.
Ah, man. I just stopped being sore from the last fight. I mean, you really send me out.
So, yeah,
All
just
right.
while you go buy some
Okay.
healing potions across the street.
All right. Wish me luck. I'm
Yeah.
not bloodied
Bye.
yet.
If you don't leave now, you're going to get engaged in combat with me.
Okay, I'm going.